Everyone, just while we have our attendees joining us, I just want to say a big welcome to the UCD Architecture Summer School today. My name is Laura Egan O'Brien. I'm the UCD College of Engineering and Architecture Marketing Manager. I'm going to be your host today. We were disappointed that we couldn't have our normal on-campus architectural summer school as we would every year, particularly because architecture is such a practical and hands-on degree, and we really like to show off our facilities, but it actually means that we get to engage with a wider audience, which is, you know, it's not a bad thing. So hopefully you'll enjoy today. You'll learn a few new things, and you can join in with our workshop as well. So some housekeeping before we get started. Just to let you know, we are recording the session today. So if you miss anything or you want to look back at any information that we give you, you can do that. So I'll be putting the video up on our YouTube channel. It should be up at maybe 2. And then I'll also send you a link to that video once it's up on our YouTube channel, so you'll know where to find it. If you have any questions today, don't be afraid to type them into us. You can do that using the Q&A button, which is on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. We will probably leave actually answering those questions till towards the end, as we might cover them as part of the presentations we're going to give you today. Lastly, just to let you know, we are going to be running an Instagram competition over on our channel, which is UCD Eng Arc. It's a really simple competition, and I'll tell you how you can be with a chance to win our prize at the end of the session today, so stick around till the end. Schedule wise, you're going to get an overview of our architectural program, the kind of discipline of architecture. You'll get a sample lecture, sample tutorial, kind of sample workshop, and then we'll also have a Q&A with 2 of our current students at the end, and that's where you'll get a chance to get your questions answered. So we have Professor Hugh Campbell with us, who is the Dean of Architecture. So I think we'll get started with our session today, and Hugh's going to give you an overview of architecture and the architectural degree that we have first. So Hugh, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you very much for attending today. It's kind of curious circumstance in which to be doing this, and we'll talk a little bit about that actually in some of the activities or the presentations we're going to make. But I suppose just to say, first of all, I guess if you're coming to study architecture, really what you're going to be involved in is what I like to call imagining and creating worlds. So whether that's at the scale of a room in a house or an extension, which we're going to be talking about today, or a larger building or a piece of city, public space, private space, all of these places that we inhabit and all of the functions that they serve have all been the subject of the work by architects and larger design teams. So architects are fundamentally involved in coming into a situation, understanding what the needs are in that situation, talking to the clients, the users, the people who have functional needs, and then trying somehow to take all of those needs and to take all the parameters and constraints of a given situation and to propose something that not just fulfills the requirements, but actually makes something that also gives pleasure, gives richness, adds joy to people's lives. So that means that it's fundamentally a creative activity. And I don't mean that as necessarily in the same way as one produces a piece of art, but it's producing an artful solution to a complex problem. So when you're studying architecture, that fundamental activity of coming up with these solutions to these complex problems is what you will spend a great deal of your time doing. It's one of these subjects where from the outset, you're doing the thing that you're being trained to do. So you're being asked to act as an architect right from your first year of study. We've got 5 years of study, ultimately leading to a master's in architecture with an undergraduate degree built in along that journey. And in each of those years, you're effectively building up your capacities in terms of the complexity of situations that you can deal with and the richness and complexity of the design response that you can produce in relation to that. At the same time, you're building up your knowledge in areas of the history of architecture, the theory of architecture, architectural technology, the environment, obviously incredibly important at the moment, and all the other factors that impact on the built environment and how we inhabit it. So it's a subject that overlaps with and connects with a lot of other subjects. It's in part a science, it's in part an art, it's involved with engineering, it's involved with the sociology, the sociology of how people work together, live together, play together. It's involved with philosophy. It's involved and connected to, as I say, a whole range of other disciplines. But its fundamental act is to synthesize and to come up with proposals. So if that thought about proposing a piece of environment where something could happen is something that excites you, and it might be because you're coming from an artistic background, or you're coming from a more technical background, or you're coming from a more philosophical background. There's lots of roots into this subject, but it's that core activity that I think characterizes it. I could say more about the ins and outs of the structure of the program, but I think it's probably better just to give you that flavor of the sort of ethos of it and how it operates. That means that really the fundamental setting for us in terms of education is the studio. So not the classroom, not the lecture room, but the studio and a workshop. So the idea is that you're in a studio, you have a place to work, and you're working on drawings and you're making models and you're somehow conjuring these imagined worlds into being. You're refining them, you're developing them, you're testing them, you're talking obviously to teachers and tutors at the whole time in developing your ideas, and then you're doing it again, and then you're doing it again. So the studio is the base, and that creative act of design is the core. I think that might come through a little bit in how we wanted to structure the activities today. So we wanted to try to find a way of focusing our activities. And if I can I share my screen, Laura? Yeah, I can. I'll just do that. I think if we're keeping questions at the end, I might just jump straight into a quick, this is a relatively short, just little talk based on a radio talk that I did earlier this year on the subject of making home. And so we've sort of taken this idea of the home, which you're all familiar with, you've all grown up in or lived in homes, or home or homes, houses, apartments, doesn't matter, any kind of dwelling. So that is a piece of architecture that we're all kind of familiar with. And it's interesting that at the moment, as we speak, the situation we're in, everybody is at home all the time. And that means that homes in turn are having to be reinvented, rethought, serve a lot of different purposes. I'm having to try to conduct meetings while also keeping kids busy at their own work or entertained while other things are going on as well. So the house now expands to become more the workplace, and those lines get blurred, and somehow the home still endures, I guess, within that, even while rooms get made over into home offices, or even while people's bookcases and surroundings now appear as part of their everyday work lives. So you're constantly being exposed to little pieces of people's private worlds made suddenly public by this condition that we're in. So in a way, that's a kind of context for thinking and rethinking again about how we live, about our patterns of dwelling. And this is somewhere where architecture really comes into focus for us, because all of us, as I say, are familiar with the idea of home. And we understand that somehow our home says something about us. In other words, there's a sort of relationship between who we are and where we live. And the idea of the habitat is very closely connected to the idea of habits. So the habits that we form, the way that we act, our patterns of behavior, seems to be very closely bound up with our habitat, with the space that contains those habits. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister during the Second World War and immediately afterwards, famously said that we shape our spaces and thereafter they shape us. And this is this kind of two-edged sword that architecture is involved in. So on the one hand, we understand that we are the shapers of space, and that space that we make has the power to shape the lives of the inhabitants of the space. But on the other hand, it's actually the inhabitants of the space that shape it in the first instance. And he was talking actually when he spoke about the House of Commons in the UK, where there was a proposal to rebuild it in a different form after it had been destroyed in the Second World War, because as it stands, it can't actually accommodate all of the MPs at any one time, and it has this adversarial layout. But he was saying we need that layout because that layout has actually made our democracy the way it is. And if we use a different kind of space, a different kind of room, actually the nature of our democracy will change. So really making that point that the shape of our architecture fundamentally impacts on the shape of our behavior. And we know this, of course, from our own experience of homes, but we also know it, I think, actually from the role that the house and the home plays often in fiction. If we think about endless novels in which the house as a setting, think about Jane Eyre, for instance, where the house is a major kind of character, or the houses she lives in are kind of major characters in understanding the psychology of the main protagonist in that novel. Or think about film, and we can all think about films. I mean, I'm thinking about a recent rash of horror movies, for instance, if you think about Get Out, famously, or Hereditary. There's any number of recent horror films where the house is actually a sort of major character in the film in its own right. I was thinking I was going to speak just for a few minutes about a couple of others. The first is, these are both actually Best Picture Oscar winners, so they have that in common as well. But the first one is a film by Alfonso Cuarón called Roma from 2018. Because I think you would say of this film that the house, maybe more or as much as its inhabitants, is in fact the main protagonist. And this film, Alfonso Cuarón, of course, made a number of films, including Gravity, which was the picture he made immediately before this one. But for this picture, he returned to his childhood home in the Colonia Roma neighborhood of Mexico City, hence the name Roma. This is actually his house, and he used the front of his own house where he grew up and another house as the main settings for this film. So the house in the film serves to frame and structure a lot of the action. It configures and conditions relationships between the four children. It's basically a family movie, their mother Sophia, and between the family and their maids Cleo and Adela. The house is the main setting for the film, and it was faithfully reconstructed actually in a shell of a house on the same street as Cuarón's actual house. So we saw the frontage of Cuarón's actual house, but they had to buy another house down the street because his own one had been so radically altered. They bought another house and they rebuilt his house inside the shell of the house they bought. And then with the aid of the director's memories, the set directors tracked down about 80% of his home's original furniture, spread out among relatives. Some of it had been sold on, and the rest they found or built themselves. They stuffed all the drawers with objects, even if those drawers were never going to be opened in the movie. So Cuarón was really keen that the house was as close as possible a replica as the house that he grew up in, as if recognizing that the architecture in and of itself played an incredibly important role in the story. And you see in the story the way the house provides a sort of armature for character and for narrative. Its general configuration is actually important in this regard. There's a kind of C shape of rooms arranged around this central staircase we see here, which brings light down from above. And that arrangement allows the lives of the family and their helpers to overlap at times. You don't see it in this shot, but the maid is actually sitting just beside them watching the TV in one of the rooms upstairs. And then at times it allows separate lives to be lived by the maids and by the sort of family that live in the house. So the configuration of the house is actually supporting a story of these two parallel worlds. So upstairs bedrooms and an informal living and TV room are distributed around a hall, and the looseness of that arrangement means that actually at a point in the film, all those spaces get rearranged. So this interweaving of the two worlds, this world of the family, and if I flip forward, and sometimes overlapping with the world of the maids and sometimes separating, means that you kind of actually understand something about class division in Mexican society. And sometimes actually it's the servants, Cleo particularly, who seem to have enjoy more, oddly, independence in terms of they have this whole back way into the kitchen of the house and up onto the rooftop where they spend a lot of time, again, with the kids. So there's the sort of formal front of the house and the informal back of the house, and both of these together go to make this very rich environment, which, as I say, supports the whole telling of the family drama. And it's interesting to think about whether with a different kind of house, a different set of spaces, a different kind of configuration, actually a different story would happen, a different kind of history would be possible. So this, I think, just goes to demonstrate that way in which architecture shapes the lives of its inhabitants in a very fundamental way. And the corollary of that being, if you change the architecture, possibly you're able to invent new ways of living. You're possibly able to liberate people from habits and open up new possibilities for them. So actually this it's interesting that this house now, the actual house, has become a kind of site of pilgrimage for watchers of the film. So there's this association with the real place, with this fictional space that we see on the screen. And an even more recent example of the same kind of phenomenon where a house sort of becomes a major character in the film is the film that won Best Picture earlier this year, Parasite, which I hope people have seen. It's just come out streaming now, which is an amazing film set in Korea, you know, where there's a family that lives in this pretty, I think I have some images of it. They don't live here. They live in a very squalid kind of basement flat. Here they are posing on the sort of very peculiar toilet arrangement in that flat. And they determine to invade effectively the lives of another very, very, very wealthy family who live in this extraordinary house and garden. And they inveigle their way into it. I don't want to give too many spoilers for people who haven't seen it. But again, the contrast between these two worlds, the kind of chaotic, kind of dense, very kind of not very appealing world of the house that the family lives in, and then the house that they're transplanted to, makes very clear narrative points and lets the narrative unfold in certain ways at certain times. And of course, as that the film goes on, you realize that in fact, even within this other house, the wealthy house, there's another world, another underworld, if you can put it like that way, which we're just glimpsing in this image here. So again, the architecture, and in this case, it's an invented architecture. They built a lot of sets. It's not a discovered house. It's actually an amalgam of a number of sets put together. But this architecture acts to suggest narrative, to suggest character, to underline certain narrative points in the film. And it plays this very active role, and it's very evident as you're watching the film. So in terms of what that means for architecture, I guess for us it points at this capacity that architecture has, as I say, to identify characteristics and needs. And I know Michael will talk about this when he's talking about how you design a house, and to try to use the architecture to frame those, but also the possibility that if you change an architecture or make it a different way, you might actually be able to induce new kinds of habits and offer new kinds of possibilities for the inhabitants. And so just to finish, I'm only trying to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. So on that theme of inventing new possibilities and what a house might do, there was a recent exhibition a couple of years ago about Japanese architecture, Japanese house architecture since the Second World War. And Japanese architecture has this amazing capacity, particularly in the domestic architecture, to invent these new possibilities of dwelling. This is a very famous house by an architect called Toyo Ito, the U house, where there's basically two parts of the family and they live at either end of the U, if you like, and then that U-shaped space in the middle becomes a kind of mixing ground, if you like, between the inhabitants, this strange space that's not like the usual kinds of rooms and defined territories that we're used to. It's much more unusual in terms of scale, its material, its form, but actually it's kind of liberating it offers new kinds of relationships between the inhabitants, and there's something exciting about architecture's capacity to invent form and to propose new ways in which people might live together. Here's another example from the same featured in that same exhibition, which is basically a whole house built of concrete in this case, which is all organized effectively around that staircase you see on the right hand side. It's a tiny little tower house. You can see it here, surrounded by its much larger neighbors, a tiny little outcropping of concrete, and effectively the whole family life is organized around that stair. So something that a staircase that we sometimes think of as a merely functional sort of part of any dwelling becomes the whole focus of the whole house. Or here's a more recent experiment by an architect called Fujimoto, where he questions the whole idea of rooms as being fully enclosed or houses as being completely private. Here, as you can see, people are very much on display. Even their car is on display in its carport right next to the entrance. People are living on different levels, on platforms. Light and air are coming in from every direction. It seems to be proposing to us that we might live our life. Well, it might be challenging or it might be liberating, but it's certainly saying, let's not take for granted the fixed elements of the house, the stair, the room, how we circulate, the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, the living room. These things are not necessarily fixed forever. And architecture sometimes has that capacity to be playful, to invent, to throw these things into the air and to see if things might be done differently. And actually, particularly at a time like now, when we're questioning the lines between work and home, or when we're questioning how architecture should be built to respond to issues of climate change, there's actually a requirement to rethink the ways in which we build, the patterns of dwelling that we're trying to encourage. Another house filled with earth, an earthen floor under a tall pitched roof. This is Shannara House. And then this final house that I just wanted to mention briefly by an architect, the firm Sana, effectively, which is called the Mori Ami House. And this is a sort of series, it's not really one house, it's a series of little pavilions that are all built together on a plot, such that each pavilion is basically one room and you can wander outside from one to the other. And Mori Ami, the guy who owns this house, basically lives on his own, and he has a number of lodgers who move into these pavilions and stay for a short period of time. There's a nice film that was made of this, another film just to finish with, which I'm just going to show you the trailer with to finish, where we see Mori Ami-san and we see him, we see how he spends his day basically wanting to see this. Just seeing the trailer for this film here, but you get the feeling of the sort of interesting situations that this architecture allows and produces for this quite idiosyncratic inhabitant. Sometimes outside, sometimes inside, acrobatic reading, interesting relationships, interesting new dispositions, body postures even. That the suggestion again is that the architecture supports and enables this kind of unusual exciting life, including silent movies. Happy birthday. So I'll finish there. I mean, I suppose my main point is this, that I wanted to offer the idea that the very familiar patterns of dwelling and the very familiar feelings we have towards home point to the importance of the architecture of home. But they also say that the potential of architecture is always to support those feelings, to enrich them, but actually also maybe sometimes to challenge them, to liberate them, and to change them. Okay, I'll stop there and I'll hand over back to Laura.
Great, thank you so much, Hugh. That was really, really interesting, and I hope our attendees found it interesting also. So next up, we're going to have Michael Pike, who's another one of our academics, and he's going to do a kind of sample tutorial, a kind of around drawing rooms and the design process around, designing a house. I'm just going to get him with us now.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael. So you can start whenever you want. You're just on mute at the moment. So if you want to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you see that screen?
Yep, you can see that fine.
Okay, so hello everyone. I think, so this talk is, I suppose, more of a slideshow than a lecture, and I think it probably will follow on pretty well from what Hugh Campbell was talking about. So this is called Drawing Rooms, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the process of designing a house. And as an example, I'm going to use this house that we designed a number of years ago, which is in the kind of south inner suburbs of Dublin, in an area called Ranelagh. And we finished it, I think, in 2010. And I suppose it's kind of interesting to talk about, partly, I suppose, because I can show the process, but also this was the first kind of complete one-off house that we designed and constructed. We had done a number of extensions and modifications to existing houses. So it was the kind of first standalone house that we designed. And I suppose it's also interesting because it was kind of the first experiment that we have made in thinking about low energy, low carbon construction. So this was the first chance that we really had the opportunity to explore those ideas. And it's something that we're obviously thinking about more and more in our work. So I suppose what I'm really going to do is show a number of the drawings that we would have made in the process of working through this project. And I suppose this is something that I've been thinking about in the kind of research and teaching work that I've done as well. I'm very interested in this idea of how do we draw and think about the design of domestic space. So somehow this really interesting question of how we use drawing to envision domestic life or future domestic life onto a two-dimensional surface. And I suppose the kind of things that influence the kinds of drawings that we make, whether there are kind of existing perceptions or our kind of personal history of domestic space, or the kind of cultural context that shapes those perceptions. All of these kind of factors begin to play on this process of drawing and thinking about domestic space. So this kind of first drawing is a sketch that we would have made of the main living room in this house, and putting in quite a lot of detail and trying to think about the process of how this house would be appropriated and inhabited. So these are the kinds of drawings that we would have made and then discussed with the clients. So this is the site drawing, which shows the context for this house. And it's on a mews lane in this area, which I said was in Ranelagh. And so I suppose the context is a kind of a main road, which is to the north of this drawing, which is called Northbrook Road, which has a series of quite large scale Victorian houses. And this is kind of very much in the backlands of those, and actually was formerly part of convent lands. So it was a kind of edge of a convent that had existed in this kind of backlands area. And the site that our clients had purchased was this kind of wedge-shaped site at the end of this lane. So a sort of slightly leftover kind of space. And it did have an existing cottage at the east end of the site, which was kind of in poor condition and was demolished as part of this project. So I suppose one of the things that we're always really interested in thinking about domestic projects, or really any projects, I suppose, is the kind of conditional nature of architectural practice, that we're always working with those conditions of the site conditions, of the client's brief, of the budget, but also the kind of regulatory requirements and planning requirements. And so all of these things are a kind of really important part of the process. In a way, I think for us, the kind of ideas, the architectural ideas emerge through this very close engagement with those conditions. So we never really come to a project with a fixed idea. They always emerge through the design process and through the discussions with the client. So this is the kind of site plan as it began to develop. And I suppose these are kind of very much initial sketches. So we would have undertaken a survey of this site. We would have obviously had quite detailed discussions with the client about their brief. And then we would have started to make drawings. And these are kind of very initial sketches, which would have been made in sketchbooks, or, you know, they might have been sketched when we were in a cafe or doing something else. And it's this process of just beginning to tease out and to think about this process. And you can see from the sketches that they're a combination of plan and section drawings in 2 dimensions, and then also kind of sketches or views of the form of the house in 3 dimensions. So this is very much the kind of starting point of the design process. And then I suppose what we would tend to do with every domestic project is to start to present options. So we're very interested in the idea that at an early stage of the project, having kind of considered the brief, we would go away and then think about 2 or 3 options that we can present and discuss with the client. So I suppose the reason we do this and are very interested is because we want to start a conversation with the client. We want them to be engaged in the process right from the beginning, and to feel that they have an ownership of the process and of the house. And I suppose we think that's a very important part of effectively the appropriation of the house. And we're trying to make something that is a kind of living artifact, that they feel like they have a kind of ownership of it, and they can inhabit it and live it to its full. So we don't ever want this situation where they feel like they're not in control of the design process. So this is kind of one way so this is kind of one option we would have presented, and this is another slightly different option. So we very deliberately don't fix our ideas at this stage, but present a range of options of different kind of layouts and formats, and start that discussion with the client about the possibilities. So we sort of, some architects will sort of find this a difficult idea, that they want to just present one scheme to the client, but we're very interested in this idea that it's kind of an open-ended process, and that the discussion and the conversation with the client is a really important part of it. So you can see from the kind of general layouts that we were always thinking that the house would be at the east end of the site, would be more or less on the footprint of the existing cottage, which allows for a garden in the kind of narrower part of the site, which is southwest facing. So it has all the sunlight. And then beginning to arrange the house where the living rooms can enjoy this view of the garden, and that the car access and kind of store area is at the kind of western end of the site. So these were the kind of proposals that we would have gone to the client initially. And then I suppose this was kind of how that evolved. So this is an example of a planning drawing. So having gone through a process of discussing different ideas, we kind of arrived at one version of the house that the client was happy with. And I suppose the nature of the site is that there was an existing privet hedge along the lane, which we tried to retain. So then we made a kind of new entrance court from the lane, and you come in through a kind of layers of lobby into a hallway, and then into the main living spaces, which all open out in different ways to the garden. So trying to make this kind of slightly loose arrangement of rooms that always have this strong sense of connection to the outside. And then we would have made this study model, which we would have used kind of from the beginning to test the form of it in relation to its surroundings and its context. And this model, I suppose, would have been very useful for us in our process, but also in that process of trying to explain it to the clients so that they had an understanding of what they were getting. And I suppose from that process, there's a kind of process of planning permission, and then we would have moved into a far more detailed stage, having got planning. So we would have started to make a set of tender drawings, much more detailed drawings where we're looking at every piece of the building. And I suppose at this stage, we start to see these kind of ideas about the construction of this house, where we're very much thinking about sustainable building materials. So this is made as a timber frame, which is then clad in brick, and it's a highly insulated fabric. And then the windows are made in timber. And these drawings then would have included a kind of a lot of detail of the elements of the building. So I suppose at this stage of the process, we're really aiming to draw absolutely everything in the house. And so this is an example of drawings of a kind of study, the sort of home office, which is above the living room. And they show the kind of configuration of a sort of built-in furniture element, which is a desk, which folds around to become a seat that sits down, so that overlooks the living. So somehow the kind of detailed resolution of all of these things would have been done at that stage before we went to go to a builder. So this would have been the stage where there was a very involved and detailed discussion with the client about every aspect of the house. And I suppose at the same time as that, we were making these kinds of drawings. So you can see the perspective drawing, which is that thing of trying to work through and trying to imagine the kind of configuration of these rooms and how they would be inhabited. So we were using these sketch drawings to give a kind of evocation of what the future house might be like. So you can see the photo of the living room as it was eventually made, and this sketch drawing, which would have been presented to the client at the tender stage. And I suppose a lot of these drawings you can see are made by hand. And I suppose we think that's a really important part of the process, partly because we then have this very direct connection to the spaces that we're making, that we're drawing them by hand, and therefore thinking about them. Is this kind of connection between the brain thinking about it and the hand drawing it, which we think is really important. And also because I suppose these drawings actually remain as drawings, that they don't get confused with photo montages or other kinds of computer presentations where they become a very close simulation of reality. Actually, we like these because they're clearly still a drawing. So you can imagine what the space is like, but it's not pretending to be a photograph of the final space. So that's something that we kind of use. So in this case, we would have made a computer model of the house, but then we would have set up these views and sketched over them to put in the kind of layers of inhabitation, the figures of the paintings of the wood for the fire. All of that kind of detail would have been added by hand. And then I suppose there would have been a series of other kind of drawings made at different stages. So this would have been a kind of drawing that we made in the office at a later stage to present it, which shows this idea of the kind of, it's an exploded axonometric, trying to show the kind of sequence of construction and the way that we thought about the making of it. So at the bottom of the drawing, you can see there's a kind of site works or groundworks, which are a series of kind of masonry elements that we would have originally made the ground of the site, including terraces and the ground floor of the house. Then there's a kind of series of these timber framed walls that arrive, and then a series of kind of joinery and timber elements that sit within that. So that includes kind of the upper floor, the staircase, and all of these kind of joinery and fittings. And then finally, there's a roof, a zinc roof that sits on top. So somehow this drawing is trying to explain the kind of way that the construction of the house is thought about. So this drawing is a sort of final version of the plans. So you can see at the bottom there's a section drawing which shows this kind of monopitch roof that we made that in a way brings the scale of the house down from the scale of the neighbors down to the scale of the garden. The kind of middle drawing is the ground floor plan, which is a version of what was shown earlier, where there's an entrance court coming through into a hallway, and then a series of living spaces that wrap around that and enjoy these kind of diagonal connections to the garden. And then at the sort of eastern end of the plan, there's a kind of study stroke spare bedroom, a bathroom, and kind of plant room and utility areas for the house. And then at the upper level, there's a series of bedrooms that have this kind of staggered plan so that they can look down the garden and without looking directly at the backs of the neighbors, which are to the south. So there's this kind of configuration of that where there's a series of rooms that have this staggered outline. And then there's that kind of upper living space stroke home office, which looks down over the living, but also looks out to the garden to the west. So this is the kind of final version sort of presentation drawings that we would have made at the end, showing the arrangement of the house. And this final image is kind of showing the house from the garden. So trying to give an idea of the way that this house is now inhabited and has a kind of life. And I suppose one of the things that's interesting for us is this is a house for one of my family members. So we've had this kind of long connection. So our children are always there playing with their cousins, and we've had this connection to the house over the last 9 or 10 years, which is very interesting because we sort of see now how it's evolved and how it's inhabited. But there's something, I suppose, in this image just about that kind of sense of inhabitation of the final house, and the idea that gradually this has been appropriated by the clients and they've made it into their family home. So that's really the basis of the talk. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. That was really interesting to see kind of architecture in practice and maybe some more of the, the drawings that students are interested in and things like that. So that's really, really great. We're going to move on now to our kind of sample workshop element of the session today. So we're going to get Fiona MacDonald, another one of our academics, with us, and she can tell you what she's going to do with you. Yep, we can see your screen now. Thanks, Fiona.
Okay, super. Okay, we're going forward instead of back. I have to do the controls manually. Okay. Okay, everyone, sorry about that. So, yes, a space from imagination to visual representation. I'm keeping things domestic with the tone of the afternoon. And in this workshop, you're asked to make a visual representation of a domestic space from your imagination using a technique known as collage. You'll basically work on a blank postcard-sized piece of card and use some pieces of coloured paper, newspaper cuttings, whatever you've got with to hand to build up a representation of your imagined space. But firstly, let's think about a little bit more about space. In architectural terms, space can be described as the intangible defined by the tangible, by the architectural elements of screens, walls, floor, ceiling, oaks, columns and beams. What we're looking at here at the moment is a collage representation of a space by Mies van der Rohe, who is one of the most influential architects from the last century. And Mies often worked with collage to make spatial studies, both in his own work and with his students. You can see how the basic principles of perspective are employed here. So objects furthest away appear smaller, and the closer the object is to the viewer, the larger it seems. We can also see that spatial relationship and the proximity of the elements, the column, the window or the wall surface, and so on, the screen. The spatial relationship helps to define the scale of the space. Another one of Mies's collages where he's looking at an inside-outside relationship between internal rooms in a courtyard house. Again, a hint or suggestion of a tree in the courtyard in the distance. And then there's a perimeter wall that runs up the same datum around both of the spaces, both inside and outside. We see how the floor surface continues out from the internal spaces into the courtyard space as well. And there's the suggestion of materiality comes into play here and helps to define the space he's making. In this Sunlight in an Empty Room by the painter Edward Hopper, and we see more about atmosphere and material that's created by the play of light in this room. And we get a hint of the setting for the room just through the use of colour and suggestion of foliage from a large or mature tree outside the window. So in a way there's just a suggested setting for this room, possibly in a large garden, in a house, in a large garden, but we're not sure. And in that sense, colour can often be used in representation of space just to give a suggestion of an atmosphere that you're trying to create or that you would like to have experienced by the user of the space. Next image is also a painting. It's by Hammershaw. He was also interested in the play of natural light and internal space. But he makes the viewer acutely aware of the relationship between the source of natural light and the room across which it is experienced. Here is a slightly more complex spatial relationship where the viewer is outside the room in which the light is falling. And we get a sense from the mirror and piece of furniture that we may be standing in a hallway or on a landing, looking through into a larger room with a window to the left side at the rear. So he's setting up a number of spatial experiences and a series of layers. Here again, Hammershaw looks at light across a series of spaces. In this case, he uses planes or the vertical lines. We get the suggestion of a door and wall, and we're immediately outside that. So it's very close to us as a viewer. And we're looking across the space past a human figure, which also helps to give scale to space, and out towards the window. Here, Hammershaw, he changes the position of the viewer to the higher level in the composition. So we're at a higher level looking across what seems like an open or external courtyard space at rooms that open onto the, or look out onto that courtyard from the upper level. And we get the suggestion of possibly an archway to a door or a doorway out onto a street. We get a stairs or set of steps leading off that external court as well. So again, the complexity of the spatial relationships has increased in this. Now, let's just think about what kind of space you might, or what considerations you might take into account today when you go about making your collage image. Like you might even, this is the Farnsworth House, again by Mies van der Rohe, who made those collages that we saw earlier in the talk. So Mies in this building has created an open plan space where he uses furnishings and screens to help define or subdivide that open plan partially. And there's a very strong relationship with outside. So you might think about whether your space has a relationship with outside, with nature. Is there a view? Is it at the same level as the ground outside? In this case, the Farnsworth House is slightly higher than the ground immediately outside as a means of avoiding flooding, so it's slightly elevated above the ground outside. Whereas in this House at Turn End by Peter Arlington, he's created spaces where it's almost difficult to tell what's inside and outside. The the boundary line is more ambiguous when the screen doors are open back, and the floor surface from inside extends outwards to the garden space. We get views in different directions to the garden in which the building sits. Is very much part of the external garden space. You might ask if is there a particular view or a landscape? Maybe it's actually, maybe the space you're imagining is an external domestic space. Here we're looking at an image of the garden and the existing wall in a house Le Corbusier designed for his mother, and the mature tree and its proximity to the wall, the garden furniture, and a place for, a carafe of wine or something, a ledge by this ope in the window or in the wall, all suggest a nice space to inhabit, if the sun's shining, and the possibility of a view out through that ope, but we're not sure from this image. We see here the focus is on that view out towards a horizon line, and we see a little sailboat, so obviously it's water, it's a lake, in this case it's Lake Geneva. But again, it's just that the idea of including the horizon, the boat, all suggestive of a setting, and then the proximity or in a sense, the dominance of this mature tree in the image as well. It gives it a certain importance. So the scale of the elements that we include in our image will start to suggest the scale and the spatial relations within the image. Here we're looking at quite a messy space. It's Francis Bacon's studio. And I've included this just to, we don't see the floor for the amount of paint and painters' equipment that's there. We see that the light source is from a roof light, and it's a sloping roof. So we've got a few hints at, what it would be like to be inside that room, almost, the smell, the oily paint. So you might think about that and what the floor is made from, whether it's completely visible or are there objects in there that might even add to the senses or the sensual experience of space. It could be very pared back with simply a view to the sky. This is a James Turrell sky room. And then you start to experience that same space throughout the day, changing of with the focus on the sky, the changing colors of the sky, and on the light that's falling through that ope. It could be very minimal and pared back. Or it could be, as with this collage by the landscape architect Yves Brunier, it's a suggestion of for a garden on top of the Pompidou Center in Paris. And so he's looking at a little bit of Parisian skyscape view of the city from that high space. You can imagine thinking about a balcony or maybe a shared roof garden and an apartment block. So, thinking about being high up with sky and rooftops and cityscape in the distance. So I've just gone and to, I suppose, give you a sense of maybe how you go about doing your collage exercise. That it's a playful exercise, that you start to, think about the relationship between the objects or pieces of paper that you cut, and their scale, and also the scale of, the spatial relationship between the edges of the piece of card. So in a way, you're thinking of it as a blank space in which then you place elements or architectural elements, something to suggest a wall or a screen or a floor, a window, a roof, a garden, the type of landscape that you, elements like a palm tree, for example, might suggest a particular climate, a particular place in the world, or the color of the sky, the color of the materials even, or the roofscapes that you might see in a city. It might actually suggest whereabouts this room in your imagination is, in fact, in this world. And color, you think back to Hopper and the suggestion of landscape outside might simply be a tone of green out there. So we don't have to be, I suppose, photorealistic when we work with collage. We can start to, in this I'm just putting in, thinking about color in a room that's looking out onto a walled garden. There's a floor surface that extends outwards into that part of that garden. And so I was thinking about a tree as well and what scale that tree would be. And here it looked too large, so I was sort of moving towards smaller elements. And there, with some sky, I haven't finished the sky in this, but just for the purposes of indicating how to go about it. A lot of these pieces of paper were cut or marked in relation to each other, and then I built up that image to show some sense of perspective and scale and materiality. And that's kind of it. But I suppose the key here is to observe what's happening when you move the architectural elements or pieces of paper that you've cut about on the card, and just observe them in relation to each other and imagine, where the viewer is and where you want their eye to be drawn through the space, across the space, or to look up, to look down, to look one side or the other, or to the center. So it's kind of a playful exercise in a sense, and it's about discovering something about space as you make it. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks Fiona, that was really great. For any students who are wanting to produce their own collage and want to kind of, or maybe trying to follow along and have the materials all in hand, we are going to run a competition over on our Instagram page for those who want to participate. Two competitions really. One, if you just go over to UCD Eng Arc on Instagram and give us a follow, and then there is a post, I think it's first on the grid, about the summer school today, and just give that post a like. I'll pick a random winner tomorrow afternoon, and you can win a UCD Engineering and Architecture hoodie. And then for those who do produce a collage, if you want to either do it as a post on Instagram or share it on your story, a picture of your collage that you produce today or tomorrow, I'll pick a winner then, and that person will win a UCD goodie bag, which includes the hoodie, but also a Just Eat voucher as well. And then for those of you who maybe, I assume everyone has Instagram, but if you don't have Instagram, if you want to send it to me by email as well, that would be great. So I'll give you kind of a couple of days to do that. I'll pick a winner next week. So again, just share your collages with us. That would be great. We'd really like to see them. And thank you very much, Fiona, for putting that kind of together. I hope our attendees found it really interesting. So we're going to move on now to our Q&A panel with our current students. So we have two students joining us today. One of them is Zeph, and he is just, I think, finished second year. And then we have Lilu, who is just, I think, finished third year. I know we've been sent a couple of questions in, but if you want to start sending your questions in now, and we'll get answering them for you. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'll get started with some of the questions. We want to fit in as many as we can before we have to finish today. So let me just have a look. Obviously, the first question that came in was one that I get very often is art an important subject for this course? So for what I'd say is it's not one of the subject requirements that we have. Subject requirement wise to get into architecture, it's English from the Leaving Cert. I know we have some international students with us, but it's from the Leaving Cert. It's English, Irish, Maths, a third language, and then 2 other recognized subjects. So you'll see that art and things like tech graphics and things aren't a requirement, and neither is a portfolio. But for yourselves, I don't know for the Leaving Cert, did you do art and did you find it beneficial, or did you find that you weren't at a disadvantage for not doing art? Zeph, if you want to go first.
So yeah, I did art and I found it fairly helpful. It especially helps with the creativity side of what you're doing. That's like helpful, not necessary, but definitely there are transferable skills in it.
And Lilia, did you have art background coming into the course?
No, I did tech graph. I thought that was beneficial and like helped me visualize spaces more, and like I was able to use like the 3D spatial awareness I gained from that subject and applied into architecture. But the way this course is structured, I think everyone kind of learns those skills in first year anyway. So in areas that I already knew, like that I learned in tech graph but not in art, I was able to improve my art skills there, whereas other people who did art and not tech graph, they were able to develop their more like line drawing skills in first year. And I think first year is kind of everyone, it builds everyone to the same level, and you need to work on your skills that you lack in, rather than you're just always going to be behind. So like everyone's trying to get to the same level in first year, and after that everyone has like the base level then.
Yeah, great. That's really interesting. And also one of the questions obviously is why we don't ask for a portfolio, and that kind of feeds into your answers. Because it's not a requirement subject-wise to have art or tech graphics coming in, and because the course is structured as in that you get a foundation in architectural drawing skills and things right from first year, we're not asking students to prove, you know, that they have these skills beforehand, which is why we don't ask for a portfolio as far as the entry requirements goes. And then can I just ask you, maybe, obviously, did you look at other options for coming into college, or were you only looking at architecture, or maybe why you chose architecture to study at third level?
Will I go first?
Yeah.
I wasn't strictly looking at architecture only, so I didn't like apply to all the top architecture courses in the country. I was very specific about UCD's architecture course, and I think my other choices were like a design course, just general design, and a couple of other fairly design sensible types. So it was more the design mentality that I wanted to learn, and I figured by what I could find, UCD's architecture program was probably the strongest design-centric course in Ireland, as far as I could tell, for what I wanted anyway.
Great. And Lilia?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of a person that I wasn't like really into maths, that I knew I wanted to be like a mathematician, or like really into art and I wanted to be an artist, or I really liked history and I really wanted to be a historian. Like I liked history and I liked maths, and it was architecture kind of combined those subjects where you learn like history, you do modules in history, but you're also doing modules in using my like tech graph skills, and I'm also doing modules in engineering. So it's kind of a subject that combines a lot of my interests, rather than having to give up my interests and focus solely on another part.
Yeah, great. And then obviously students who aren't coming in from doing art before they come in, would you describe that you have to be good at art, or are you taught how to be good at art when you actually come into the course?
I don't think I'm especially good at art, or that I'd call myself nearly like anything near that. I think once you come in and you kind of, with other people who might be good at art, might be not so good at art, you get into this mindset of, and you're like learning from other people. Yeah. So you can become good at it, and there's different aspects of art. So it's not like everyone comes in and they're amazing at watercolors and they're amazing at like model making and stuff. So you learn those skills and you develop on them. So you don't necessarily need to know them straight away and you're like thrown into the deep end.
Yeah. That's a very good summary of it.
Yeah. And then for students who are kind of maybe obviously wanting to get into architecture because they have that creative side, or maybe they have the technical side, Do you find that the actual course is more suited to people from a creative or technical, or is there a good mix of both?
I think there's a mix of everything. I think with this course especially, and especially in UCD, it's quite not self-taught, like you don't get any help, but you need to be self-driven and you need to push yourself and know where you need to improve on. So if you know you need to like improve on your sketching skills, you need to say to yourself, like, I need to sketch more, rather than there's not going to be a teacher there being like, okay, today we're going to sketch, you know? So you need to like identify that where you lack in and what you're good at yourself.
Yeah. In terms of how they build up skill sets in first year, they do a really, really concise job of teaching the technical graphics side of skills. And they try to encourage you to learn art side more, but they're not, and the creativity, but they're not as kind of they don't have a formula to teach art or the creative stuff you would learn in art in Leaving Cert. So I found that the kind of stuff that I learned in Leaving Cert art, I could transfer quite well. And I did tech graph as well. And if I hadn't done tech graph, I wouldn't be at a disadvantage. I wouldn't either way, but the art course for Leaving Cert is it's better at teaching the creative side of that.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that'll be very helpful of way of describing it. Obviously for a lot of students who are looking at architecture, they probably hear from other people that it's quite an intensive course. Can you maybe talk about what a typical week looks like for you, and how intensive you found the course, and maybe a little bit about studio work, because that's what a lot of people want to know about. Zeph, if you want to go first.
Sure. So certainly in first year, it comes as a shock to quite a lot of students that there's a lot of work. And it's the thing that I usually say about the work is it's quite a lot of hours, but it's hours spent in a studio with loads of people, and you can be like chatting back and forth, no problems with that. You could be listening to music, listening to a podcast, listening to something that you want to listen to while you're working away. And it's not mentally intense work, it's more just time intensive. Certainly a lot of the time there's bursts of I need to just focus on this, no distractions, but then that'll be followed with hours of model making where you can be working with your hands but kind of engaging with a conversation 3 desks down or chatting to someone else or whatever. So in terms of hours, I went way overboard and spent far too much time in studio. Especially around wintertime, I sometimes just don't see the light of day in first year. But that is definitely a high outlier. A lot of my course are much more social than me, and I don't know exactly how many hours they'd spend, but it's comparable to a work day as like adult life. 9 to 5, 9 to 6, probably 9 to 6 or a little bit more.
Lilian, and how have you found the workload? What's your kind of week look like?
My week, I go in quite early. I know I'm more productive in the morning, so I kind of go into college around 8 between 8 and 9. And then I normally have lectures in the morning or tutorials, and then normally it's in the afternoons there's studio. And then you kind of, outside of those hours, you need to get your own work done for your subjects, if you're writing essays or for just submissions in general. I think in first and second year, there is time where it's realistic to have a bit of a life outside of architecture, but I know in third year, everything is basically dedicated to architecture. But I think everyone in the course is in the same boat, and everyone, you make so many good friends that you're all in it together. So it doesn't feel like you're spending hours and hours and hours in there alone, you know? And it's really good, like we'll order food in the evening and we'll all have dinner together. Yeah, but I think there are sacrifices you have to make if you look at other people, like your friends in other courses in like, and I don't know, arts or engineering and stuff, where they have time to go out a few times a week. Definitely in architecture you don't.
Okay, I think it's good to be realistic. I think it's good to give out you know, practical advice for students who are looking to do architecture. I think that's really good. Obviously you were talking about the social aspect, and the fact that our class sizes are really small for architecture I think is really good. Someone was asking how many we take in. So we take in 57 students each year from the Leaving Cert from the CEO system, and then obviously we take in some international students as well. So it's probably around a class size of maybe around 70 students, I'd say. So it's relatively small, and yeah, I think you get to know your class really, really well. There's a great social aspect to it also, so that's really good to hear. We got a couple of questions around, obviously students are maybe looking at computer software to do architecture. Is there much computers in your architecture course? Is it more hand-based, more physical-based, or is there a transition from maybe first year to second year where you're looking at progressing on to computer modeling software, that kind of thing?
Yeah, in first year it's all hand done, so that's where my technical graphics skills really came in, that I was able to you know about line weights and like how to draw techniques to draw certain things. But then in second year there's kind of a transition on, there's not a big pressure to use computers. They like it, but as in it's not like if you hand draw it you'd get a lower grade, you know. And then in third year, it's definitely like you need to be using the computer. But I think that kind of sets you up for the workplace as well, because when you go out to work, you're not going to be doing hand drawings. It's so much faster to use the computer. But in first year, definitely there's no need to go out and buy a fancy computer or anything.
In fact, you'll probably get told off if you try to hand in work done by computer,
Yeah,
as
definitely.
a couple of my year found out and were really annoyed because they felt their stuff looked really good, but they got told off for it basically. But no, in second year, in terms of prior knowledge of computing for this, they teach you anything that you need to know to work on computers. So you don't need, like, don't worry about computer skill at all. It doesn't come into first year, and in second year they teach you anything that you'd need to know.
Yeah, in second year there's a specific module that'll teach you the skills on Photoshop and like AutoCAD that you'll need to use.
And then I suppose, Leila, this is probably more specifically for you, but someone's asking how many girls in the course, or maybe what the split is like, or did you have any issues being a female student in an architectural course?
Yeah, I think architecture is actually really good that there is about maybe 50-50, 60-40 kind of split. And I could definitely see it in first year that they were really conscious about about the gender balance. So in each year, if there's around 60 people in each year and you're divided into subgroups of about 10 or 12, and then in each group, well, I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but definitely every group had about half girls, half boys. There was no group that was just all guys or one group that was just all girls. And then in partner work, a lot of the times they will split you up. So your partner will always be a guy or a girl, whatever.
Okay, great. And then obviously we pride ourselves on the facilities that we have, and for architecture, particularly compared to other courses, the need for facilities is a lot greater. So maybe you want to describe some of the facilities that we have and maybe how you interact with them as part of your course.
Yeah, we have a computer room. I guess that's kind of to do with the previous question. There's a computer room, so there's not a real need to buy your own laptop until about third year. So on those computers, there's all the Adobe softwares, AutoCAD, Revit, all that, so you can use them freely. And then there's printers there, and we have an A1 plotter. And then there's also Architecture Society, and they always put on social events that people can go to. Yeah, and then we have a cafe in the building, so people have their lunch there and we all have lunch together. It's quite, because architecture each year is quite small, the whole school is quite like a community. Like you can get to know people from the year above, the year below. Yeah, so it's pretty good.
I'd add to that there's a kind of stationery and architectural supplies shop that is run with the school. It'll be more expensive, but when you need something, it's almost always available to get it from location. And there's a building lab for any kind of construction that's run by people who really know what they're doing with that. The more constructive elements, and in that there's a laser printer available for use from people, I think, second year and above. During second year they teach us what we have to do to use that.
Yeah, they just got a new laser printer this year, so
Yeah.
there's something there now.
Good to know. And then we also have obviously the architectural library, which I'm sure is quite useful for research or projects. And then obviously studio space is a massive thing for the architecture course. And I would say each year group has a separate studio. So there's like a first year studio, second year studio, and so forth. And UCD at the moment is kind of guaranteeing that each student has their own kind of studio space, and that's yours for the rest of that particular year. So you're not having to move your stuff around. Do you find that that's quite good, that you don't have, that you have your own space and you can kind of make it your own?
Yeah, it's quite, you make it quite homely. Like you bring in, people like would bring in pictures of their dogs and hang them up, and like you'd have everything like tea bags, and you can take care of it yourself, so you can clean it. You don't have to feel a pressure to clean it. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, it really becomes a kind of communal home where everyone has their own space. And like in first year around Christmas time, we like got up on chairs on tables and pinned loads of tinsel and fairy lights all across the studio. And the tutors were absolutely terrified. Like, what? But we're free to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice. It's really good. And then we had, I don't know if either of you have either done it or want to do it, but UC obviously has a lot of study abroad opportunities, and then travel is quite probably encouraged with the architectural course. Do you have experience with that, or do you have any classmates that have done study abroad?
Well, I applied for Erasmus, so second semester next year I'd be going on Erasmus, but it's kind of a bit uncertain now because of the whole coronavirus. But yeah, a lot of my friends have their study abroad sorted out. So like I got into Brisbane, and then I know a lot of people are going different places across Europe and to New Zealand, to Canada. Yeah, so there's a lot of options to study abroad. And then every year the architecture school your architecture year organizes class trips. I call them mandatory class trips. So in first year you normally go to Rome, and then in second year we went to Venice, and then this year we went to Seville, but I'm unsure about the future of them. But yeah. They're fun.
Yeah, in terms of study abroad, it certainly seems to be more for fourth year, but in second year, so first year you don't really interact with the abroad stuff outside of the mandatory trip. But in second year, we had, I can't remember exactly how many, but a reasonably large handful of international exchange students. Well, not exchange because we didn't have anyone leave us, but people from other universities across the world came to study with us for mainly first semester, but a couple of them stayed on through second semester as well.
Yeah, and then for students who are maybe wanting to know about the structure of the course, so how we're operating at the moment is you can exit after year 3 with a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Science. Also, you can exit after 4th year with a Bachelor of Architectural Science. A very subtle difference, but it's just a different kind of qualification. And then you can exit after year 5, which is what I think a lot of our students are doing, because after year 5, you finish with both the Bachelor and the Master's degree. So it's a kind of 3, 4, or 5 year program, with the majority doing the 5-year program. And then maybe students who are wanting to do a master's somewhere else, they might do the 4-year program and then go to do a course somewhere else afterwards. But to practice as an architect in Ireland, you have to do up to the master's. So you have to have a bachelor, you have to have a master's, then you'll work in industry or kind of practice for 2 years before you can sit your professional exams, at which stage then after that you can be qualified as an architect and register. And be on the Register of Architects. So it is quite a long process, but it is very worthwhile in the end. And so there's a lot of choice around, you know, kind of the structure of the degree and, you know, where you're wanting to study and things like that. So 3, 4 or 5 year kind of degree program, with the majority doing the full 5-year program with us. So I think that was one question. Another question was, let's see. So obviously UCD offers the UCD Horizons program. So that what that means to students is, while you're not doing a double major, you're not doing a, you know, a degree with something else, it means you can choose to do things that are of interest to you outside of your particular course. I know for architecture, because it is very intensive, there may not be as many opportunities, but did either of you do any UC Horizons programs outside architecture?
Yeah, I did. Well, I did project management last year. It was really good. I really enjoyed it because I think everyone in there was interested in the course, so you didn't have that issue of people doing, one person doing the whole project and other people, you know, just riding along. And you learned a lot of skills, like time management skills and skills to really help you in your personal life. So that was really good. But I know a lot of my friends would do subjects that they'd be interested in outside of architecture. So someone did like biology, someone else does like accounting. You know, there's so many modules you can take on that you'd be interested in, but not necessarily want to dedicate a whole degree to.
Yeah, I haven't done much outside of the School of Architecture. The elective I took this year was photography, which in terms of skill set is a bit outside, but it was run in the kind of umbrella of the School of Architecture. So
yeah. And then obviously we have some international students joining us today, and maybe some students who are not from the Dublin area as well. So did either of you do on-campus accommodation, or are you still living at home? Or I think people just wanted to know a bit more about on-campus accommodation.
Yeah, I stayed on campus in first year, and then I found private accommodation in second year. I think if you're an international student, I think you're guaranteed on campus, and then and most first years will get on campus when they apply for it. It's actually a really good way to find new friends that are outside of the course. I think because UCD is such a big university, it's quite hard to make friends that you normally wouldn't interact with. So finding people like housemates. So each accommodation is kind of split into different houses, and then within that there's different apartments, and then within that you have your own room. So you make friends with who you're sharing like the kitchen with, but you'll also make friends with people you share the whole apartment with, and then people in the whole block. And the majority of them are first years, so yeah, you'll make friends through that. And then on campus they have like an events thing, so they'll do yoga in the morning, or they'll have a barbecue. I think sometimes they get a like a carnival there, like not a Ferris wheel, but some rides. Yeah, it's quite fun. So, or a movie night.
Right, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. So obviously the degree itself is an architectural degree, but it's geared towards that kind of professional aspect of becoming an architect. Most of our students, that's what they do when they're finished, they become professional architects. Do you have any career aspirations? Are you planning to go into work as an architect? Are you looking at ancillary fields? And are you hopeful about your career prospects when you're finished your degree?
I was quite hopeful, but I'm not sure on how the COVID thing affects it. But I think like houses still need to be built, and like things still need to be designed. So it's not going to completely be gone, you know. And then by the time, if you're entering in this September, in 5 years, like things will 100% be different to what they are now. Yeah, I'm kind of still on the fence of if I want to be an architect or not. I still really like maths, so I was considering going back into architecture, or sorry, engineering, into the structural engineering program. But I think architecture has really given me a good foundation of skills. Like I can now use CAD, you know, I can sketch, I can do a bit of engineering, I know a bit about like architecture history. It's given me a good like foundation to go into another course if I want to.
yeah, I'd be similar, though I haven't thought about it as much. There's just more course ahead of me that is more what I'm focusing on. But at the moment, I'm still relatively, like, becoming an architect is still kind of at the front of my mind of what options I have beyond there. But there are various other smaller ideas that I can pursue as well.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. And I mean, especially looking at, you know, Ireland did have a recession before. It's looking maybe likely we're going to go into another recession now with the COVID-19 situation. But even at that stage, there was still a need for architects. There was still construction going on. At the moment, you know, Ireland, before this was experiencing a period of growth, so there was a lot of construction going on. And also architects are looking at that more sustainable development aspect as well. So that's a new avenue and a new kind of string to the bow of an architect. And then we have students who go into ancillary fields like landscape architecture, planning, they go into research. We've had students go into interior design and photography, graphic design. So there's a lot of transferable skills with an architecture degree. So career-wise, I think there's plenty of opportunities to be an architect. And also the degree travels quite well because we have good accreditation from the Irish body, the UK body, and also the US body we have accreditation with. So I think the degree travels well, and then there's plenty of transferable skills for other career opportunities as well. So I wouldn't let that deter. And as Lila said, students coming into a degree now, the landscape is very different to what they'll finish with. So it's kind of hard to know what to expect. But I wouldn't let that deter people from pursuing a career in architecture, because it's really rewarding and it's more of a passion than someone who's wanting to just, you know, make a fortune and retire early, that kind of thing. So I think we'll go through a couple of questions real quickly. Student was asking around Irish for the Leaving Cert. So if you have an exemption from Irish, you just replace that Irish subject with something else. You don't need to have done Irish if you have an official exemption. Subject requirements for maybe students who are international or from, you know, the UK, Northern Ireland students, can find more information on our ucd.ie/registry page or ucd.ie/global. So there's a lot of more information there, and that's changing all the time with you know, new information as well. So you can find out more information around your non-leaving cert subject requirements there. Landscape architecture, I'm sorry, normally we would cover that as part of this particular summer school, but because this year was an online event, we're kind of shoehorned into doing it in a short amount of time. We're not covering landscape architecture today, but I will send links to anyone who registered for the event today with some useful information, including more information on landscape architecture. And I'm more than happy to answer those kind of questions after the event today. So just send me any questions around landscape architecture by email and I'll get back to you. Points requirements for architecture in 2019 were 473. So obviously points change year on year. We don't really know what they'll do, but we envisioned it would stay roughly around that particular points range. So 473 was 2019. And then maybe we'll fit in one more. Someone was asking around a tour of the architecture building. So of course, as the usual event, we would have given you a tour, but because it's not an event, that's not available. And I don't think the campus will open up fully to the likes of tours until maybe the second trimester. So from January on, they'll be giving more architectural tours and campus tours like they would normally. So just keep an eye on our website, myucd.ie, and they'll let you know when architectural and campus tours are up and running again. But basically that's really all the time we have today. We got through a lot of questions, so thank you very much to Zeph and Lilu. That was really good. I hope everyone enjoyed the content today, the sample lecture tutorial, the workshop, to kind of give you a flavor of what it is to study architecture, maybe hopefully piqued your interest. If anyone has any questions that we didn't get through today, don't be afraid to send them to me by email, and I'll follow up with you, and I'll send everyone some links to the video that we recorded today, and also then some more information on the courses itself, so you can follow up with that. But thank you so much for everyone tuning in to us today, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks. Bye.